everyone for being here for this holiday Memorial Candlelight service. I'd like to say thank you for all of you spending your afternoon here with us today. The Roller family and our staff would like to wish you all a happy holiday and a new year. After our candlelight service, we will be having refreshments in our garden. And again, thank you all for being here today. Being with us.
Good afternoon. I'm Renata Jenkins Fowler, and my grandparents started Roller Funeral Homes in Mountain Home, Arkansas. And throughout the years, we have wanted to give back to the families that we serve at this time. And we have said it's a holiday memorial candlelight service, and it is a holiday. It includes Thanksgiving, it includes Christmas, it includes New Year's. We get some feedback that it needs to be called a Christmas holiday service to reiterate our faith, and that is what our faith is, Christians. This is a Christian run organization. But it's not just for Christmas that we're having this service. It's to help each family get through all the holidays. And the three that are right here back to back, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's, are times when families lean on each other and come together much more often than throughout the rest of the year. So, excuse us for saying it's holiday, but that really is what it is. It is in December, and with that, I'm going to do a poem called Angels in Heaven. We have angels in heaven who look down on us here, while the world all around us says, be of good cheer. Everyone else is bustling about. We simply watch it go by. Yet we just want to shout, don't you know it's not merry at this time of year, when all our lives feel so empty and our eyes fill with tears. We can't bear the thought of another holiday without our precious loved one who was taken away. But their spirit does live on through their physical being, though their physical being may be gone. Look around and you will see their soul lives on in your memory. You'll see your loved one, eyes so bright, in every twinkling Christmas light. There are angels in heaven who look down on us here, and they are trying to tell us, don't worry, we're here. We love you and miss you. We'll never be far. Just look to the sky and the bright Christmas star. Take a special moment throughout these blessed days to remember me in the kindest of ways. Give my smile to the person who needs it like you, and my spirit will live on through the things that you do. Thank you.
physically with us in Arkansas today in the next couple of days. A part of John is in Maryland with his sister Becky. The part of him that is with his sister is an aching heart. Because his sister, like any in this room, had heard the diagnosis of cancer. They've been told that she needs a bone marrow transplant. And without that transplant, there really is no hope. So in effect, she's terminally ill. So that's why I think Dr. Kanai is eminently qualified to speak to us. Not necessarily because of his technical educational background, but his experience as a fellow human being who has lost in his life, but still now breathing, fervently praying that the right match will be found for his sister. Dr. Kanai, would you please come and share your message?
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that, and very much I appreciate your prayers for my sister. I'm glad that you're here today, and I appreciate the Roller family in reaching out to the community, and especially to the people that they have served in the last year or two. There's a man by the name of Horatio Gates Spafford that lived in Chicago a number of years ago. He was an attorney, a very wealthy man, owned a lot of real estate in Chicago. In 1861, he married a woman from Norway by the name of Anna Larsen. By 1870, we had 3 girls, beautiful young girls, and one on the way. And then in 1871, from October 8th to October 10th, there was the Great Chicago Fire. And this wealthy attorney, Mr. Horatio Gates Spafford, lost almost everything. All of his apartment buildings, all of his commercial buildings, his office buildings. And in fact, he was considered one of the over 100 homeless people in Chicago. He and his wife decided that they would minister to other homeless people, and so they erected kind of a shack there on the site of where their home was, and they clothed people, they fed people, they gave them a place to sleep. And after a couple of years of doing this, they decided that they might relocate as missionaries in Europe. And so they bought a ticket on the Villa de Haga. The family was journeying to Europe. And then at the last minute, Mr. Spafford was called from New York back to Chicago because there was a very high-profile court case. And he had to be there to defend this individual. So he said goodbye to his wife. She got on the Villa de Haga, and he went back to Chicago. And on November 22nd, 1873, the Villa de Haga collided with another ship in the Atlantic. And out of 260 passengers, only 61 were saved. Mr. Spafford waited, and he waited. And in fact, he waited for 9 days before finally on December 1st, 1873, he received this telegram: "Saved alone, your wife." He had lost all of his children. His wife was in Wales, and she wanted him to come to her. And so he went to New York, and he bought a ticket on another ship, and he journeyed to Wales. But there was a very astute captain of that ship who took the approximate route of the Villa de Haga. And when they got over the site in the Atlantic where that ship, the Villa de Haga, had sunk, he went down to Mr. Spafford's berth, and he said, "I think you might want to come up to the deck, because we're over the approximate site where your daughters died." Mr. Spafford grabbed a pen and a piece of paper, and he walked up to the deck of the ship, and he looked into the dark Atlantic waters, and he wrote these words: "When peace like a river attendeth my way, When sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Later on, Mr. Spafford wrote that he never really knew much about God until the horrible tragedy of his daughters. The story doesn't end there. He and his wife ended their life. They had 4 children, but they ended their life in Jerusalem ministering to homeless people before the nation of Israel was established in 1848. I'm going to take this story this afternoon. I just want to share with you 3 simple things from the story. 3 simple things that I think over time are pretty profound. Number 1 is that we are all forced at some point in time to acknowledge a death. As Bill said, I had to acknowledge the death of my infant daughter. I've had to bury a parent and acknowledge the death of my father, who was a Baptist minister for 51 years and a great guy. We're forced to acknowledge the death, and sometimes it's very traumatic. When the surgeon walks out of the surgery room and says, "I'm sorry, you died during surgery." When the police officer comes and knocks on the door, and you know something's wrong because your husband, your son, your daughter hasn't come home, and they walk into your home and they say, "Do you want us to call your minister, your pastor, your priest?" You're forced to acknowledge that same note that Mr. Spafford acknowledged, saved alone. I've lost someone. I've lost people that I love. Now, here's the point. To acknowledge a loss is really to acknowledge a life. And there's the beauty in all that. To acknowledge a loss is to acknowledge a life that existed, and the love that accompanied that life. And so when I say to people, and I have for 28 years, at some point in time you've got to stop denying this and avoiding this, and you have to accept the fact that your loved one has died. They look at me and say, I don't want to do that. And I say, you do. Because when you acknowledge the loss, you're really acknowledging the life and the love and the beauty that that person brought to your life. I had a lady that came to me and she wanted to see me because her husband had died. Now, one of the ways that we acknowledge a death and one of the ways that we acknowledge a loss is to tell the story. We talk about the loved one. So whenever a new patient comes into my office, I always ask them, tell me the story. Can you tell me the story? Can you tell me what you've been through? From the diagnosis to the time of death. If there was a sudden death, tell me about how you heard about it. And so we talk about the loved one, and the person ends up telling me the story. And there are literally, in 28 years, there's literally thousands of people that I have never met because they died before I had any contact with their family. But I feel like I know them. When I see their loved one, and I say, "How you doing?" And I remember about their husband, their wife, their son, their daughter. So she came to me. I looked at her and I said, "Okay, you want to talk about your husband?" She said, "No." I said, "You made this appointment with me, and you made it because your husband died." "Yeah, yes, but I don't want to talk about it." I said, "Okay, I just have one question for you. How did you and your husband meet?" She started to talk, and she literally talked for 55 minutes. I didn't say one word. That's right. In fact, when I did talk, I looked at her and I said, "The session's over, and that'll be $150. She walked out of the office and she said, "Dr. Klein, I talked for 55 minutes about it." And I said, "I know." I said, "You were acknowledging the death by acknowledging the life." And I said, "How do you feel?" And I never will forget, she looked at me, she said, "I feel so much better." And all she did was tell the story. Will you tell the story? You feel better? We have a wonderful opportunity in the next 2 or 3 weeks to tell the story. Thanksgiving, to Christmas, to New Year's, for the time that everybody gathers around the table, Christmas, and you save an empty plate. For your wife, for your husband, for grandmother, grandfather. That's all right. Don't let anybody sit there. You say, "That's so sad and it's so painful." It's sad and it's painful, but it's part of the process. And it's the way we get better. For my children, whenever they would get a splinter or they would get a little sore on their finger, First thing Dad would do is say, we got to put some iodine on that. We got to cleanse it. They would hate me for saying that. They would say, no, it's all right. And I've noticed that people do that emotionally. When I say we need to cleanse, emotionally you need to be cleansed, and they say, no, I'm all right. I'm doing okay. No, yeah. It's painful. It's hard. But you will get better. And you will get through this. You need to engage with the process, and it begins with you acknowledge the death, and acknowledge the life, and in turn, acknowledge the life. Number two, and all of these begin with A. Number two is to accept the grief. I believe Mr. Spafford accepted his grief when he looked into the waters of the Atlantic and he wrote those beautiful words. Peace like a river at the end of my way, and sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my lot now has taught me to say, God, it is well with my soul. You're in charge. He was acknowledging the horrible pain that he was going through, and yet at the same time saying, God, this is my lot in life for right now. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't believe God had my daughter die to teach me anything. I don't believe God's in the business of destroying lives. God's in the business of creating love, creating people to be ambassadors for Him. Accepting your grief is very, very difficult. I have a friend, William Ward, out in California, who's authored a number of books on grief. He taught at Harvard University close to 25 years. And Bill has told me, when somebody is grieving and they walk into my office, he says, I can immediately tell, physically I can tell, because they're going to be burdened. And they're actually going to show the burden physically. He said many times they will be kind of hunched over because they're grieving, and their grief is such a burden. It's a cloak we put on. Not a cloak we want, but it's a cloak that is actually rooted in love. When people say to me, why do we grieve? There's an answer to that. We grieve because we love. You stop loving, you stop grieving. But if you're loving, if you care about the people in your life, and you have a love bond with them, at some point in time, somebody's going to grieve unless you all die together. That's just the way it is. We don't talk about it. We don't think about it. We like to just push it aside. But nevertheless, it's there. And grief is a part of life. There's a lady up in Flint, little community outside of Flint, Michigan. I'm from that area. Her daughter was 18 years old, and she was captain of the homecoming queens squad, or captain of the homecoming queens group, and captain of the cheering squad. And she was diagnosed in February with a brain tumor, and she died about 6 weeks later. This has been a few years ago. And the mother sat in my office, and she said, you know, all of the kids, she was a senior in high school, she said, all of the kids that was with my daughter have now gone away to school, but they're all coming back for Thanksgiving and for Christmas, and I don't want them to forget her. I want them to remember her. And I said, okay, you want to do something? She said, I do. I don't know what to do. She said, I don't want to call them over to the house because she said, I just don't want to put them on the spot. I want to do something simple and something that's kind of disconnected from them, but something that they'll know that. I said, well, I can't tell you what it is, but I can tell you your passion is great and you need to honor your daughter during this time. After the holiday season, she came in. She went to Kmart and she got a 4-foot electric candle. Her daughter's room was on the second floor of the house, and it overlooked one of the main streets in town. And she said, I pulled back the drapes and I put up the blinds. She said, I plugged in the candle, I put it on a little stand, that it took up the whole window. And she said, I let it burn for 2 weeks during the holiday season. She said, Dr. Knight, it was an awesome experience. It was wonderful. She said people would actually pull up in front of the house and stop their car and point to the candle in the window. And she said, I knew they were talking about my daughter. And I knew that they were remembering. Grief, if you don't get anything else this afternoon out of this session, please remember this. Grief is not to stay in like this. Grief is to flow out like this. You say, why? How do you know that? Because that's what love does. If love is supposed to flow out, and we say, yes, it is, then grief. We're grieving because we love. Then grief should flow out. breathe out. And how do we do that? Just like cars need roads to travel on, we need rituals to travel on. That's why we light candles. That's why we have a service like this. That's why we put a 4-foot candle in the window. That's why we have an empty chair at the table. That's why we go around the table and tell stories of my dad and his 51 years in ministry. That's why we put everybody in the car and we start Christmas Day with going to the cemetery and gathering around grandmother's grave and talking about her and saying a prayer and singing songs. That's why we do it, because grief, letting our grief flow out. These people that try to hold the grief in, mostly psychologically not helpful. Lastly, to adjust to a new normal. We acknowledge, we accept, and we adjust. That's just the way it is. You can do it, but you have to adjust to a new normal. You say, I don't want a new normal. I want things to be the way they're saying, the way they were. I want them to be the same. They're not going to be the same. They're not going to be the way they were. In fact, Epicurus said years ago, not even talking about that, he said, no man steps into the same river twice. Today is different than yesterday. Tomorrow will be different than today. Things have changed. Things are different. Can they be better? That's up to you. It will be up to you to adjust to a new normal. That's what we're confronted with this holiday season. Christmas is going to be much different than it was last year, for those of you that had someone die last year. New Year's will be much different. You're creating a new normal. This will become the year that you remember 5 years from now. And you know, we really need to do it with the same faith that we had before our Lord died. And that's hard. There's a story in the Bible, John chapter 11, where the disciples told Jesus that Lazarus had died. You know the story. Jesus resurrected Lazarus. Shortest verse of the Bible, John 11:35, Jesus wept even though Jesus knew he was going to resurrect Lazarus. And there's a story there that Mary and Martha went to Jesus, and this is interesting. They said to Jesus, if you'd been here, our brother Lazarus wouldn't have died. I don't know about you, but that sounds to me like weak faith. That Jesus didn't know what he was doing. You say, no, it sounds like strong faith. If Jesus had been there, then this wouldn't have happened. No, I don't think so. They were questioning Jesus. What's wrong here? Why weren't you with us so you could write? You know what Jesus said? This is very, very intriguing to me when I do a little study on it. Jesus said, Mary, Martha, let's go back. Take me back. Take me to Lazarus. Take me back where you lost your faith. Yeah, I get it now. Because most people, when they have the death of a loved one, begin to question God. And, okay, what's God doing? C.S. Lewis did, the greatest writer of all time, in my opinion. Wrote the Chronicles of Narnia when his wife died. You haven't seen the movie Shadowlands, don't watch it alone, but watch it. He questioned God. He wrote the book of Grief Observed, and he said, I even wonder if there is a God after all these years of ministry to people. You see, that's what happens when it comes time for a new normal. It's like God takes us back and says, let's review. How did you get started? When did your faith actually begin? Let's go back, because that's what you're going to need again with this new normal. Is faith in me and trust in me. And how it works. It's an adjustment we all have to make. Whether it's an infant daughter that I look at the pink bedroom that I'm needed for, or whether it's a wife or a husband. There's an adjustment now, really, that has to be made. And it's time to really be on your faith. With this, I close. I believe that people are survivors. I will always believe that. I believe God built us that way. That it's only when we quit that we're not survivors. And as long as we don't quit, we will survive. We will get through it, no matter what the tragedy or what the trauma. But I was invited by the Ministerial Association in Seattle, Washington, some years ago to come out and speak. And they wanted me to speak on relationships. I was also speaking in a hospital and a couple of churches. They didn't want any of that. They wanted relationships. And they said, Dr. Kanai, you can talk about grief if you want to. In the context of relationships, we really want you to talk about relationships. So I went out there and I spoke in this ballroom. 400 or 500 people spoke for an hour. During the course of the hour, I talked about hugs. bridges to each other. When we disconnect and when we don't want to have anything to do with each other, we build walls. Well, I'm finished speaking, I'm going to the back, and I'm saying goodbye to some people, and there's this guy that's standing over to my left who's about 6'6" and 300 pounds, huge hand, big guy, just staring at me. You ever had anybody who stared at you? Just stared at you? I kept saying goodbye to people, kept looking again, saying goodbye to people, kept looking again, kept thinking, I'm just getting on and just leave like everybody else. He just stood there and stared at me. Finally, the last person left involved. And unfortunately, my briefcase was about halfway between where he was and where I was, and I needed my briefcase. So I started walking towards my briefcase, and I did what my German mother, who's still living at 93, always told me to do. She said, if you don't want to talk to someone, don't make eye contact with them. So I put my head down. But you know what you do, you always look up what it is. What's going on? So I got to my briefcase, and he got there at the same time. I looked up, I said, sir, can I help you? I was a bit irritated. He looked at me and he said, John, I've waited all this time to give you a hug. I didn't think that funny. He did. He reached down, gave me a big hug, picked me up off the ground, cracked a couple of vertebrae, put me down. He said, you know what I do? I said, no, what do you do? He says, I'm a lumberjack. Well, that makes sense. Out here in Seattle, Washington, all the trees. You're 6'6", 300 pounds. He says, I got